Hello, I'm Commissioner Ben Hovland with the U.S. Election Assistance Commission. Today we're continuing our 2020 Lessons Learned video series with two more excellent election officials. I'm pleased to be joined by Brenda Cabrera, who is the Director of Elections and General Registrar for the City of Fairfax, Virginia, and Michael Dickerson, who is currently the Director of Elections for Mecklenburg County, North Carolina, a position he's held since 1998. In addition to being great election officials, both Brenda and Michael serve on the EAC's standards board. So we thank you for that and for joining me today. To start off, can each of you tell me a little bit more about your jurisdictions? Brenda, we'll go in alphabetical order and start with you.
Thank you, Ben, for the opportunity to be here. The city of Fairfax is right outside of Washington, D.C., and we are sitting at about 17,000 voters. We are not Fairfax County, which is close to 800,000 voters, and we get confused back and forth between those. So we're a small locality, but in a large urban area. So right at the heart of what's going on in the political world, and but a small locality.
Excellent, thank you. And Michael, most people probably know Charlotte, but tell us a little bit more about Mecklenburg County.
Sure. Well, as you were saying, and thank you very much for having me. Mecklenburg County we're located in the Piedmont region of North Carolina. So we're not in the mountains, we're not in the coast, but we're not far from either. So it's a wonderful place, and it is home of the city of Charlotte. Got a diverse population of over about 1 million people that serve this, and we also serve many large businesses here in the South. Whether you're looking at this area for working or living, there are a large number of cultural things that you can get involved with. And plus we have a great couple of sports teams in this area, and it's a beautiful place to live and a wonderful place to be. Mecklenburg County itself, we're about 770,000 registered voters, approximately 43% Democrats and about 35% unaffiliates, and about 22-ish percent Republicans. So it's a large county. I think we're officially the second largest county in the state, but nobody can come close to the city of Charlotte. We generally operate about 195 precincts on election day. And this past election, we handled, I think it was 33, 34 early voting sites. So we've come a long way in the 20 years that I've been here, and it's been a great ride.
Well, thank you for that. Yeah, one of my last trips before the pandemic, I was actually in Mecklenburg County and got to go by some of those early voting sites in the presidential primary. That was, I believe that was late February. So a few weeks before everything changed for us. And thinking about that, you know, really the 2020 election was like no other. And so we've been working through this series to identify lessons learned from election officials, talking to election officials around the country about how they dealt with the challenges of the 2020 election. And, because each state runs elections a little differently, because each jurisdiction's a little different, the response to the pandemic varied across the country as well. And so I want to hear from local election officials like yourselves about how the pandemic impacted election administration in your jurisdiction. So if each of you, I'll ask this, Michael, you can go first this time. Can you talk about some of the most significant changes or challenges that your jurisdiction faced, some of the changes that you made in response to the pandemic, and just sort of generally as an overview, how it affected voting in your jurisdiction, whether that was early voting, mail absentee voting, election day, et cetera.
Sure. Well, the biggest thing we had to put up with as elections officials was not so much, it's something we deal with all the time. How do we keep everybody safe? But this time it was now amplified. How do I keep my workers safe in the midst of a pandemic? How do I keep voters safe in the midst of a pandemic with options to vote? It's all of these things now are what you plan for and think about, and what do I do? Usually you're worried about, lights or something like that, being able to go on and make sure you keep everybody safe. But what can I do to keep people safe while they're voting? And that was the biggest concern. And the neat thing that we learned out there was once we got started in keeping people safe, everybody jumped on board. Everybody joined. The outpouring that we had, especially as we were going into the general election, coming off a summer of COVID. I recall on election, our primary election day, I think it was March the 3rd, like you said, Commissioner, just exactly that. I got a call that day from the county health department, said, Michael, we've got this thing called coronavirus. You got a release from the CDC that says this is how you have to handle the coronavirus. And that's primary election day. And I'm saying, great. We're only about 7 hours into primary election day. What do you suspect? Well, there's really nothing you can do, but I'm just letting you know this is out there. And sure enough, by the time we finished canvassing the election 10 days later, well, within two weeks, we had already sent our entire staff home to keep them safe. We had weathered through the primary itself, and now our concentration was, what can we do to keep all of those voters that are going to come out and vote safe? Brenda, I don't know about you, but I never thought of a face mask, when I come up to vote, or a sneeze guard. We actually used stylus pens this year so that people didn't touch anything. They used a stylus to mark their express vote, and did not have to touch anything. Anything they signed, they could use with the ink part, and they walked out with that as being their actual I voted sticker. And you'd be surprised how many call up and complain that they didn't get an I voted sticker. So it just happens all the time. But that was the biggest hurdle that we faced when we got, okay, what do you do to keep everybody safe? And we knew if we could get it off on the right foot, everything else would follow. So we're very fortunate, a great executive director at the State Board of Elections. I say that because she has the right to fire me, but a great state board that has great program. I actually answer to 5 board members locally, and those 5 board members gave us great guidance, took a lot of the heat that we were trying to keep away from us. They were able to do that, and they were able to come up with some good planning, and that was definitely the key there of planning and figuring out what you could do to keep everybody safe. And we'll get into a little bit more, I'm sure, as our talk goes on, but I don't want to take everything. Brenda, if you'd like to jump in.
Absolutely. Brenda, again, appreciate that, Michael. And Brenda, again, just on this one, if you want to hit sort of overview on some of the big changes or what was different in your jurisdiction this year.
Well, as we've already established, Virginia votes more often than a lot of other states. And we began voting in 2020 on January 17th. That was our beginning of our absentee voting. And then by the March 3rd primary, we were aware of COVID, but I tell people I was still able to get disinfectant wipes at the grocery store. So that was very much on the leading edge of our response. About 2 weeks later, we started voting for our May city election in the middle of March. And by that time, the building was shut down, and we had this thing called PPE that we couldn't get. And we were trying to figure out on the fly how to vote in the environment. I'm not even sure we call it a pandemic at that point, but we just had a lot of obstacles to figure out how to keep going and how to vote. With the building closed, we did all of our early voting for the May election. We did that outside, curbside. So we had a phone number outside. People would call us we would go down with our equipment. We used cardboard instead of clipboards. We gave away pens because we didn't want to touch anything that anybody else had touched. And then for May, we solicited some help from the city. We had a lot of other departments that helped us with two-way radios and doorkeepers to keep people from even touching the door, so that the door would open. We could have X number of people inside the building at a given time, the rest waited outside. So it really changed most of our sort of processes, eliminating touch points. In May, I don't remember if we were giving out voting stickers at that point, but I do want to give a shout out to the city of Fairfax, because we had a sticker contest in the summer of 2020, and we found sticker dispensers that we were able to use so that we could, the election officer would pull kind of on the tail of the spool, and the voter would get their sticker without having to touch anything. And they were very excited about that. And other local localities did not have stickers. So we started getting requests for our stickers so that people could get their sticker. About 28 days after the May election, we had a June primary election. So we were voting for 2 elections at one time, for early voting in the end of May and beginning of June. And then we just rolled right into to the June election. So while everybody was talking about what they were going to do for November and how we had to manage all of these November things, we were doing it. And it was pretty awful, I would say. I might admit to checking my retirement accounts during that period of time. But all of that experience was really, was actually turned out to be a really good thing as we moved into November, because November became something that it was hard work, but we had learned so much about how to do it that other than being hard work and so forth, we were able to do it. We never left the office. We were always all in the office. So that was something, listening to other people talk about, as you did, Michael, about, we sent people home. We couldn't do that because we were voting during that entire time. So I'm sure you'll get to more specifics.
Yeah, well, and as a great reminder there, obviously when we've heard from jurisdictions, there's sort of a few buckets, though Brenda, you may have just found another one, but you've got folks who had their primary before the pandemic had really set in, and so we're really looking around. You had folks that had it in the early days. You had the states that postponed a primary, and then a lot of states also had maybe a state primary a little later in the summer. And so as people had those different experiences, and the whole election administration obviously evolved throughout the year. And one of the things I think we saw a lot in our primary lessons learned was about the availability of polling places and poll workers. So sort of on that in-person side of voting, can you all talk about, and again, if this changed like it did in many places between the primary in general or other elections that you had, Brenda, can you talk about challenges recruiting poll workers and or finding polling locations if you had to relocate those, and sort of what worked and what didn't in addressing those issues? Brenda, we'll let you go first this time.
So I'll talk about polling places first, because that's the least to talk about. We did not have closed polling places, so we did not have to relocate any of those. But our interaction with the polling places certainly changed. These are now buildings that are unstaffed. There's nobody in the schools. There's nobody in the churches. There's nobody in these buildings. So we had to do a fair amount of work to figure out how we were going to be in the buildings, but we didn't have to relocate any of them at that point. Poll workers, that was hard for May. We had a pretty high dropout rate, and that election was moved twice. So in the same way that some of those primaries were moved, our May election was moved twice, and then our June election was also moved. So that's also challenging because you've got people, even the people who were committed to a particular day, and then you move the election and maybe you have a little bit more drop off because that election was moved. We are like many other localities where our election officers are of a certain age and they happen to fall into the higher risk category for contracting the virus. At some point, and I don't think it was until after the June primary, we have an ally at George Mason University, which is right out our back door here. And Jennifer Victor put out a call to her colleagues that, hey, you know, many of us are not in the high risk category for contracting the virus, and maybe we should rally around these polling places and volunteer to work as election officers. So we had quite a few election officers that came through that avenue. Those I think we appreciated because we could assume a certain level of experience with public work and certain technology experience, but it didn't fill the gap that we had for experienced election officers who had done election work before, had been in the precincts and understood kind of all the nuances and details that we don't train brand new officers on how to do. So we ended up with more than we needed in terms of the number of election officers, but there was this knowledge gap that was hard to fill as people felt uncomfortable working on election day.
Just as a quick follow-up to that, have you seen Virginia, no rest for the weary, elections again this year? Have you seen any of those folks that came out for the first time last year signing up to be a poll worker this year, or are you seeing some drop off in that regard? We
always see some drop off after a presidential, and that's a good thing because we don't need as many in the following years as we do in a presidential. I had an opportunity to speak to a lot of those, particularly the college, the university folks that came in right after the election. And I was very heartened that many of them said they really enjoyed it and that they would continue. Some of them now have conflicts with the date. They had a conflict with the date of the June primary, but we have seen, in my estimation, a higher number of people come back and do that. Some years they only sign on for the presidential and then they're done.
Great to hear. Michael, getting back to you on this question, you talked earlier about a lot of the ways that Mecklenburg County had made it safe for voters, safe for your workers. Can you talk a little bit about, again, just this was on, finding sufficient locations if you lost any, and then finding poll workers?
Sure. We surveyed all of our poll workers shortly after the primary, and basically asked the question, are you willing to come back this fall? Because as Brenda mentioned, we do have poll workers that fall into that category of senior citizens that would be more likely to have complications if they contracted the COVID-19 virus. So we thought, okay, what can we do? We were astounded to the fact that 85% said we're coming back, we want to work. And of the ones who did not come back, we realized they said afterwards, well, had we known you were doing all this to keep us safe, we would have come back. So we did something right. We also in North Carolina had something called a Democracy Heroes program. And it was a statewide event that our state board of elections put out. And for a county like Mecklenburg with over 1 million people, we just received thousands and thousands of names from the state. What we have always done, though, is we recruit every election. So we always have a database full of if we need 3,000 people, I guarantee I've got 5,000 or 6,000 people in that database right now. So we had a number, and then on top of this, we probably received another 5,000 names from the state board of elections who were through their Democracy Heroes program and said, yeah, we'll work too. So we were very happy. We were recruiting and we had good numbers. So we were looking good at that point in time. But as Brenda mentioned, how are you going to train all these people? You don't really want to get all 30 or 40 or 50 people together or 100 people together in the midst of a pandemic and have them exposed to something that could wipe out 100 or 50 of your people right there. So we went at that point in time and started balancing a online training program with them, and at the same time doing some in-person training. Got a great training staff here that were able to develop some videos, work close with the county, and we could get those on, track people that were training, and make sure that they were all ready and all set to go. And the results were evident of our election day results. So we're quite happy with that. We did have a little bit of issue with locations. You're exactly right. I did have a couple of voting locations that were senior centers. Well, in the midst of this pandemic, don't get it out of there. So we were able to do that and get that out. And then on top about that, about July or August, our state board came down with a directive that said, you're going to need to have a whole lot more early voting sites because what we were able to do, I did not have another election until the November general, and I was able to look at the Brendas of this world and some of the counties here in North Carolina who had a second primary after the election or a continuing election after that. I was able to look and see, well, how are they voting? And we noticed that a lot were voting absentee by mail. A lot of people were choosing in North Carolina to go vote early. So our North Carolina executive director said, you need to have more early voting sites. Yeah, generally some of these locations cringe when I come to see them about being an early voting site because they know I'm going to ask for 17 days of their building or something like. Most of them are libraries. But this year we decided, since schools were out, why not use the public high school gymnasiums for as many as we can? And lo and behold, no longer did we start doing that, then we had our professional basketball team at the Spectrum Center call up and say, hey, I want you to vote over at our Spectrum Center since we're not playing basketball. And I'm thinking, oh gosh, I can't afford that. Nope, we're giving it to you. We'll help you set it up. We'll do everything for you. As soon as word got out about that, you had the professional football team, the Carolina Panthers at Bank of America say, hey, Michael, we want you to vote at our stadium here. And between the two of them, they started jockeying to make sure that they could vote more people. And in the midst of that, this is the first time it's ever happened. We had a third group. We have something called the Bowplex, which is a sort of a local sports team, a sort of our minor league hockey team that plays there. They got on the phone and said, hey, you need to be over here too. We've got more than what they've got. We have parking. And they were right. And just the atmosphere around all of that kicking off just excited everybody. And then everybody said, we're going to go vote early. So that made election day so much easier. I think election day, I had a decrease of about 65% from what I usually have on election day. And so I'm thinking, oh gosh, we screwed up. No, that was, you had 5 times more people vote by mail and about 35% more people vote early. That's where all your numbers came from. So we were very fortunate to make sure that we had those. But if it wasn't through a recruiting program, a training program that we knew we could get taken care of, we knew it would have fallen apart. And fortunately, the school gymnasiums, you can put 6 feet apart. That was our word of the day: 6 feet apart, stay 6 feet apart. And fortunately, we didn't have any outbreaks of the COVID-19 virus in the midst of any of that voting. But the training part was the hardest part. When you realize, gosh, like Brenda mentioned, I've got a lot of newbies coming in here. They don't know how to actually do all this. So we incorporated training processes into stuff where we could get the brand new ones into the office and somehow, way, shape, or form, work with us for a few minutes so that they could get enough training and be safe. Once they did that, they went out there and act like the professionals they were. You always make sure you had a talented, a guided, smart site coordinator or chief judge on election day at every site, and you knew you could make it through there. And that was the best thing to do. And the biggest thing that came up for me was we have a beautiful office here, and it's great, but as you're trying to socially distance people and get everything done, it turns out into a pretty much an impossibility. And so at that point in time, we got with our county managers and said, hey, we need to rate some offices. We need to have some space over here, space over there. I noticed that some of these counties that were doing the recount that we saw on TV, they were renting the convention center and stuff like that. I'm thinking that's crazy. But no, that would have been a great idea. I had to put part of my people in one building on the other side of town, and other people in another building, and then had to bring everything together to make sure it worked. But space really got to be a premium as we moved through. But fortunately, like I said, we were able to train, we were able to get people in there and make everybody stay safe, have everybody stay safe and vote.
That's great. You mentioned, it was great to hear the stories of folks stepping up and having their facilities be used as polling places. I think that was, certainly one of the silver linings that we saw in 2020 was the way different people, stepped up to help our democracy. One of the things that you hit on there, Michael, I had wanted to talk about, and, part of what the EAC was amplifying, and I know a lot of folks were around the country, what we were hearing from CDC was the importance of spreading that vote out. And so, and we'll talk a little bit more about vote by mail and absentee voting in a minute, but sticking on in-person voting, you did see a record amount of early in-person voting and lower numbers on election day. But again, that was a good thing because we were spreading it out. But can you talk about, I think you gave the percentages a second ago on your early voting versus election day. But can you talk about through those, if there were any issues as well, like with either voter registration or provisional ballots, tech issues that might have come up this year that were in any way different or better, I guess?
The good thing about that was all the issues were issues we have seen before. Here in Mecklenburg County, North Carolina, we've been voting early in person for 20 years. It started out, like I said, 20 years ago with about 58,000 people voting early. It was a disaster when it first started. So fortunately, we were able to get through all of these. This past year, we finished up with over 365,000 people voting in person early. Huge numbers. Like I said, it was a 30-some% increase of what I had 4 years ago in my last biggest presidential election. What we noticed, surprisingly so, because once we got the sites, State Board came down with the directive that said, okay, 30, Michael, you're going to need 33 sites. Board voted on it. My board chose the locations that we offered them, and unanimously agreed on all of them because it has to be a unanimous process in North Carolina. And that was fantastic. Outfitting, spacing. Once we got out there and we're giving people the gloves, the face mask, hand sanitizer, that sort of stuff, the pen, once they got out there and figured that out, they said, oh, I'm okay. And once you got into the voting location, you saw that everything was spaced out. You weren't waiting in a long line. You weren't crowded. So people were happy. What we didn't think about prior to that going out there was, okay, what are you going to do about these campaigners? Because, you know, as well as I do, if I'm running for office, I'm going to stand out in front of the busiest early voting site and say, I'm Michael Dickerson. Darn glad to meet you. Vote for me. Well, you might be a health hazard now. And if you are approaching individuals and they are not willing to confront and go up to you, are they going to be feeling intimidated? So fortunately, we're able to talk to our candidates, and they were able to keep their workers sort of at bay, so to speak, so that I did not have any major issues. The great thing I noticed, we originally thought 33 early voting sites. That's going to be huge. I don't think we can handle it. We actually noticed though, when we closed down at 3 o'clock, usually it's a 3 or 4 hour process. I think everybody was in our office on that last day of early voting at 3 o'clock. I think they were in the office by 4:30. It just ran so smooth, so fluidly that it actually worked out better. The hardest part was when you start looking at that, where do I put 365,000 ballots that have come in every night and secured, and where do I keep it secure, and how do I keep it that way? It's one of those things that if it gets ahead of you, you're lost. So we had a great team here that was able to keep in ahead of everything. And to our happiness, we realized that we just thought it was just going to be busy. But once we got here on the election day in person, realizing it's a decrease, okay, this is going to be okay. We just need to make sure that we dot all our I's and cross all our T's, and we'll have this done. And we can talk a few minutes about the absentee by mail voting, which presents the whole issue. But no, we were able to outfit. Obviously, there was some CARES Act money that we were able to use. There was actually, my county had no problem with funding the things that we needed to have funded. So we're very, very fortunate on our end. But equipment, laptops, every communication, all worked out really well. So it was not one of those things that we could not handle on our end. It was just how do you handle that volume that you're expecting?
That's great. Brenda, for the city of Fairfax, along those lines, for your in-person voting, both the split on your early in-person voting versus election day, and then any issues that came up with voter registration or checking in voters, provisional ballots, tech issues generally. I know from being in the greater Washington, D.C. Media market, saw a little bit of what was going on in Fairfax. And obviously there were some changes in Virginia, some court orders, et cetera. And so any of that you want to hit on how that impacted your in-person voting would be great. And again, obviously you hit the number of elections that you all had. So each one was a little different.
Right. So going back just quickly to the May election, we got the word out that voting by mail was really the best thing for people to do. So of the people that voted in that election, 75% voted by mail. And looking back at 2018 to the previous time we had held that election, it was about 1.3%. So we had an idea of what the numbers would do, and then that would be exponential going into November. You mentioned the media market. I think that had a huge impact on the number of people who voted by mail in our area. that news cycle and that information started in May and June and July, whereas normally nobody cares about absentee voting until you get into like September and October. So our first day of early voting, which is 46 days before the election, because we're Virginia and we have to do it longer. So 46 days, that also coincides with the day that we have to mail out our absentee ballots. So a lot going on that mid-September deadline. We fortunately saw the handwriting on the wall and decided that rather than just having temporaries come in the last 2 weeks of the cycle to help us with early voting, that we were going to start that way at the beginning of the cycle. We had some anticipation that instead of nobody showing up on the first day of early voting, that we were actually going to have a lot of people show up. Virginia also, as of July 1st of 2020, instituted real early voting instead of previously you had to have an excuse to absentee vote. So, and that was all in the works before COVID ever hit. So whether that was perfect storm, whatever you want to call it, those things converged. And I think in 2016, we had about 8 people who showed up on the first day to early vote. And in 2020, I think we were close to 200 on the first day. It never really let up. We had some days, and I realize those are small numbers to Michael, but I have 3 full-time staff members. So for us, these were, proportionately, these were pretty big numbers in a relatively small space. And those 3 people also managing the by mail of the early voting and the by mail at the same time. So we ended up with about 60% of those who voted in the 60% of our registered voter total voted early, compared to about 17% in 2016. And that 17% was a big number for 2016. Like that was a much bigger number in 2016 than we had seen before that. So to go from there to 60% just in early voting was a big jump. Very different way of voting. We managed it really well. You were talking about training earlier. One of the things that we did was we really relied on our election chiefs and our deputy chiefs to help us with early voting. And that, I don't think I did it that way on purpose, but as we got close to election day, I realized that this group of people had some really good training in solving problems of voters coming in, particularly voters who had requested an absentee ballot by mail and now wanted to come in and vote early. And that's a whole paperwork process that has to take place with that. So we had a very successful early voting campaign, and it actually went really, really well.
Great. And we've hit on it a little bit. I mean, you can't talk about 2020 without talking about mail and absentee balloting. Obviously, a huge part of the response to the pandemic. The EVES data isn't out yet, but as maybe as a little preview, again, not a shock, a record-setting amount, all over the country, with maybe the exception of the traditional vote by mail states or the full mail states. But so thinking about that, can you talk again? We heard Brenda, we'll have you start us off this time. You mentioned a few of those numbers, some of the spikes you saw in that in those early elections. But can you talk about throughout 2020, I guess, the general increases you saw in mail ballots, and if there was anything that you did differently to accommodate that increase, to sort of handle the challenges that are associated with switching, honestly, how you're administering your election.
No, it's a big change. And again, I became grateful after the May and June election to have learned so much while we did that. In May and June, we had some candidates that sent out absentee ballot applications to their voters, and going from 1% to a 75% was just big. And we didn't have help in the office because nobody wanted to be in the office with us. So we're playing catch up a lot in May and June, and just it didn't ever feel like we were kind of ahead of the curve. We didn't miss deadlines, but we were struggling. So we put some processes into effect over the summer, had some people come in and really came up with a better schedule of, rather than sending out, ballots based on when we got them, we set up a schedule of when we would be sending out ballots. We had some, you can't say this very often, but some ballot stuffing parties, right? So we had our ballots, and then we have in Virginia, you've got 4 envelopes that go along with every ballot. So we did all of that as much as we could over the summer of getting those ready to go, so that when we were sending out ballots in September and October, we were not starting from scratch and stuffing ballots and into envelopes and getting that ready. So that really helped, really relying on our best people to help us with proofing and making sure that we were getting all that data correct. And then having to manage the people who wanted to vote in person once the news got out that you can't trust the mail. So you have to go vote in person. And we sent out over 5,000, I think close to 6,000 ballots. And we ended up with about at least 82 of those being provisionals, because they were people who came back to vote in person for some reason or another. And then there were others who brought their ballots with them and ended up voting in person. So about 29% of the registered voter population voted by mail for the November election.
Thank you for that. Michael, can you talk about, again, I know you mentioned earlier the significant increase in Mecklenburg County around mail ballots, but can you talk about sort of what that looked like, how you adapted to that demand?
Sure. And the biggest thing was just all those little things like Brenda had mentioned. How do you stuff those many envelopes? How do you put stamps on those many envelopes? Licking it, that's just out of the question. You're not going to be able to do that even if you're doing 5,000 or 6,000, as Brenda had mentioned. It is huge, and is truly a huge number. You first have to realize that you have to get that request in North Carolina, and I'm assuming in Virginia too. You first have to have a request from the voter so that I can then process that request. So now I've got to go in and process that, mark that, get that ballot to that voter, make sure I pull the right ballot for them, and put it in the mail and have it delivered to them. And then I got to wait and say, okay, I got to process this when it comes back too. What am I going to do? Our first day, we had 77,000 sent out. The first day we sent out, that was 3 times what I had sent out before. We sent out over, our first day was like 60 days before the election. I think North Carolina, for some reason, gets to be first in the nation on that. 60 days before the election, so that weekend of September 1st, how do you get 70,000, 77,000 ballots out in the mail to people so that you can start processing the stream? And Brenda hit it perfectly. They were all asking for the ballot because they heard of the COVID. We can't do that. Let's go ahead and do that. And then all of a sudden something starts circulating. Oh, you got to order it early because the post office can't handle it. The post office can handle plenty of things. They handle medicine coming through the mail. They can handle all this, but people, wanted to think whatever. So once you could process those, and our biggest deal at processing was finding locations that we could process. Basically workspace large enough so I could keep people 6 feet apart, and I could have a laptop, have everybody secured, and not have to worry about their health as we're processing. And then once they come back, once they go out, you handle all the calls of where is my ballot, how that you're, so immediately Brenda and I are now increasing our customer service counter because now we've got all these calls coming in. And then once you got the ballot out to them, and our state did do something awfully nice too. They developed an absentee portal where you could go online as an individual and personally request an absentee ballot be sent to you. Worked great. A couple of things that worked through, but that was great. But that just meant that, okay, Michael, here's a little bit more work. So you're now working at, I think we mailed at over 220,000 absentee ballots. We got back about 135,000. And I didn't know about Brenda, but it seemed like 130,000 wanted to walk it in my front door to make sure that I received it. Once those ballots went out, people literally started lining up at the front door because we did not have drop boxes. They would line up at the front door and we'd space you 6 feet apart and all the way out to our parking lot. And you would be wrapping yourself around the building, dropping off your absentee ballot, dropping off your absentee ballot. And it worked. We were very fortunate to have great weather because it would have been horrible if it would have been too hot or too cold or too wet because all those ballots would have come in sticky or something. You just didn't want anything like that. But finding the space, finding the location, finding the area that I could actually do all this work safely, get the ballot out to it, and think about the things that you normally don't think about. How do I get this many ballots to the post office? Can the post office handle this many ballots at one time? Sure. So it's a lot of work pre-getting it to the post office. Who can I talk to? If I arrive there at midnight, is there a number I can call to have somebody come and meet me at the dock door so I can load these ballots onto to the mail trucks? So that's something that we have. The little things of, okay, I've got a Pitney Bowes mailing machine. Well, that's great, but it doesn't take long to get to, I think we're sending them out 65 or 75 cents a ballot. Well, it doesn't take long to break down a Pitney Bowes machine with that many absentee by mail. So what do you do? You contract with a printer who does mail printing and they said, sure, we'll do it. It's our regular printer. So he covered all our security issues. So that was no issue, but they're going to do that now. They're going to do some of the printing for you. And we haven't even talked about them coming back in. The processing, the return ballot, that is a whole nother matter that Brenda's and I's of the election world have to put up with. How do we certify, verify it's good, that it was returned accurately on time, it's properly executed. Now I've got to open it, take it out of the envelope, stick it on the, we use the 850s, we're ES&S down here, stick it on the 850s and process those through the readers so that we can have 135,000 ballots processed and ready to go for election night when everybody thinks all the results are final. So, but yeah, a lot of little things, any of those little issues that you might've had a year before or 2 years before, they are now 10 times bigger because you've amplified your, what you're sending out, what you're processing, what you're bringing back. You've amplified that by 10, 15, 20, 30% for early voting. 4 times the number of absentee ballots that I have ever had counted before in my life. At least 5 times as many as I sent out in this county. But here again, you look for that light at the end of the tunnel. Okay, if I can just get through this, and dear God, don't let me be Virginia or Arizona, then we're okay. Or no, I'm just kidding. Georgia or Arizona. Virginia worked out great. But no, you're just sitting back saying, okay, well, yeah, we've hit all our marks. We've done what we're supposed to do. We have controlled what we can control. And that's always the biggest thing I and the Brendas of this world do. what can we control? Because we have no control over what other people might be saying, what other people are accusing us of. As long as we do it right and do it by general statute and do it by the process has been developed, you're going to do it and you're going to succeed. Nobody can argue with your success at that point in time.
Absolutely. Well, and kind of along those lines, as I mean, we could talk about this all day, but as maybe a nice one to wrap up on here, and Michael, I'll start with you. I guess looking at 2020, you know, what changes, and this is a two-parter, I'll let you choose your own adventure here, but you know, what changes do you think are here to stay? You know, what were temporary measures, and what have you identified as things that you learned and areas that you're looking to improve for the voters in your jurisdiction?
Sure. I think the biggest thing I think we can learn is that early voting is here to stay. I think voters love that. Brenda, I'm sorry to hear you have it 46 days before the election. You poor person. Wow. I'm 17 days before. My goal will be in early voting is to make certain that I can find those large sites again. Look for the things that are access. I know it'll be a battle, especially now, but we want to continue to find those large sites because voters, even those that have ordered a ballot by mail, decided, you know what, I'm going to go vote early. I trust early voting. We'll get those results in. And that will be good. So I want to continue the success that we've built on early voting. I want to continue that. It is realistically, it's probably more effective for me to operate early voting sites than to try to operate 200 precincts on election day. I can find I find great caliber people, but you generally, if you've got somebody who wants to work for a few weeks, they're going to be more willing to give you that time than just the one day in itself. The training process that we used is another thing that I was very proud of with my staff, developing a nice online presence for training. I think that is a new and better way to go with training. You've got these online university training institutions. I think the elections business can pick up on some of that. As many things as you can do electronically. Our state also came out in the midst of this with an electronic Department of Motor Vehicles, an EDMV voter registration process, where if you had a driver's license, you could then register online. And that just saved thousands and thousands of hours of my staff doing the data entry for your voter registration. You're doing the data entry and it comes in, it verifies, we get it in, we process it and send you a voter card. So that was great. We used to get 50,000 of these on the last week and you're trying to plug them all in before you start printing poll books. But that was a process. So anything electronically that you can pick up, go with. The training process that you can go with, and go with what was proven, what voters said they liked. And voters in this county said, hey, we like early voting. And we're going to continue to try to do that. I've got some municipal elections in the smaller municipalities in Mecklenburg County this year. And we've already lined up, talked about early voting in each of those municipalities, just so we can have people out there and keep them in the habit of saying, hey, we want to keep voting. We want to vote early. And we'll have that process. Vote by mail, of course, that is absentee voting is something that people will still do. It serves a great purpose with this absentee portal that the state has. I hope it makes it easier for voters. So we'll continue with that. But have an open mind too, when you approach everything that we have, because I mean, last thing I would have thought, nobody's going to vote by mail. And then you have that, or you're not going to be able to find 33 early voting sites. Now I wish I would have found 35 early voting sites. So have the open mind and respect the voter and continue to look for that community support. I was extremely impressed with the outpouring that the businesses they were giving away barbecue sandwiches at one of my early voting sites on the first day. You went to the football stadium and they gave away masks that said Carolina Panthers. They were giving away signs and posters at the Spectrum Center for the Charlotte Hornets. So use those people. They love it. I realized that we did not find them, they found us. And they really wanted to be engaged and they really wanted to participate in this process. So enjoy that as best you can and move forward. Brenda, I'm sorry.
Well, thank you.
I think I took all your time.
Brenda, final word here on what from 2020 is here to stay, what was temporary, and again, you've got statewide election this year. So, what are you looking to improve upon from the lessons that you learned in 2020?
So we've already had another election because we had an election on June 8th. So we had an opportunity to look a little bit at what are the things that we're going to keep and what are the things that we'll be happy to see go away. I was really inspired in 2020. I think Michael alluded to this a little bit of how many people stepped up and how much creativity people employed to lots of things, whether it was, restaurants and other sectors, but certainly in the elections world as well, to keep things going and to keep people safe. One of the things going into even in this governor's election this year, is voter confidence is at a low in certain pockets. And while I can't control what people say and what they think, are there things that we can do to be more transparent about the process, the mail process, the early voting process, to counteract some of this misinformation about how this system works? We've all heard things that we go, no, that's not how it works. So I would like to focus a little bit on that going forward. Virginia already has DMV interface, and we have a citizen portal. So I think we'll continue to see the usage of that going forward. I'm a big fan of anything that can happen automatically for voters and for us. One of the things that also Virginia has had in the last year is a pretty robust couple of legislative sessions in changing laws in Virginia. So we now have early voting, we now have drop boxes, we now have a cure process for absentee ballots. So getting a little more familiar with some of those things and tightening those things up a little bit, but figuring out ways to not be quite so reactive to that, but to really come up with systems that help us do that better. I think that'll be a real benefit going forward. Virginia is also going into split reporting for the early voting. So we're going to report early voting separately from the by mail voting. I'm hoping that will also have an impact on voter confidence, as those numbers from early voting can come in at 7:05 or 7:10 and not be this huge dump of 10,000 votes that come in all at once that don't look good to the public. They have a hard time understanding. So I think that also will help going forward into future elections. And then I think things will adopt, because we adapted. We'll probably still do a lot with cleaning wipes and so forth, trying to keep our precincts a little bit tidier and keeping people. It's always flu season, even if it's not COVID season in November. So really kind of being able to adopt some of those safety measures going forward, reducing the touch points for voters when they come in, I think is still going to be important. It doesn't cost us anything to do that, and it just makes good health safety for us. So those are a couple of things I think that we'll keep going with.
Well, thank you both for that and for everything that you did for voters in 2020 and are continuing to. A big thank you to Brenda Cabrera and Michael Dickerson for joining me today. We look forward to continuing to have conversations like this as we all work to make our democracy stronger and help Americans vote. Thank you.
Thank you.